Sandra Lee had lived in her beautiful villa on the outskirts of Ho Chi Minh City for over 30 years. It was the house she and her late husband had built together, where they had raised their only son, Kevin. Things had changed since her husband's passing, but the house still held precious memories of love, sacrifice, and heartache. Though in her 70s, Sandra was still sharp, independent, and resilient. She had retired many years ago after serving as the CFO of a tech company and now enjoyed a quiet life, spending her days with her 4-year-old grandson, Noah, whom she adored. Kevin, Sandra's only son, had married Rebecca, a beautiful and intelligent young woman. At first, Rebecca was warm and gracious, but Sandra began to feel uneasy with her presence over time. The sweet, caring demeanor she had shown when she first arrived seemed to fade, replaced by a more distant and cold attitude. One day, Sandra was walking to the kitchen to get a glass of water, something she had done countless times in her own home for decades. But this time, something stopped her in her tracks. Muffled voices drifted from the kitchen. It was Rebecca's voice, but it was different, sharp, biting, and filled with contempt. "I can't stand living with that old woman anymore," Rebecca whispered to Kevin, her voice dripping with venom. "She's just an ATM for us. We're only hanging on a little longer, and soon this whole house will be ours." Sandra froze. The words cut deeper than any physical blow could. The woman she had welcomed into her home, the one she had treated like family, was speaking about her in the most disrespectful way. Kevin, her son, laughed along with Rebecca, a laugh that hit Sandra like a physical slap. He didn't even try to defend her. "Yeah, just pretend for a little longer. Mom's getting more forgetful every day. Pretty soon we'll have her sign everything over and she won't even remember doing it," he said casually, as if it was just another joke. Sandra's heart sank. Her son, the boy she had raised, fed, and cared for, was in on it. He was part of the plan to steal her life, her home, her legacy. The betrayal stung, but it wasn't just the words that cut her. It was the realization that her own flesh and blood had conspired against her. Her mind raced as the voices from the kitchen echoed in her ears. Rebecca and Kevin thought they were so clever. They thought Sandra had begun to forget things, that she was easy to manipulate. But Sandra Lee wasn't some forgetful old woman. She was sharp, and she wasn't about to let them get away with it. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. It wasn't shock anymore. It was anger. The kind of clear, focused anger that only comes when someone shows you who they really are behind their mask. Sandra turned and walked into the kitchen, her back straight, her heart pounding. Rebecca and Kevin were sitting at the kitchen table, relaxed and laughing, unaware that Sandra had heard everything. The warm scent of coffee and food filled the air, but it felt suffocating now. "Is this what you really think of me?" Sandra asked, her voice cold and steady. "You have exactly 24 hours to pack your things and leave my house, and Noah stays with me." Rebecca's mouth dropped open in shock. Kevin looked as if he had just been hit by a train. The two of them stared at Sandra, their faces shifting from confusion to disbelief. Sandra let her words sink in, her gaze unwavering. 24 hours, she repeated, letting each word land like a nail in a coffin. And with that, she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving them in stunned silence behind her. She had done it. She had taken back control. The woman who had been manipulated, who had been used, had finally drawn a line in the sand, and she wasn't going to let them cross it again. Sandra paced the house in the days following her confrontation with Kevin and Rebecca. It wasn't the fear of them leaving that weighed heavily on her heart, but the realization that her own flesh and blood had been plotting behind her back. The betrayal stung more than she had anticipated. Every room she walked into, every corner of her house, now felt different. The walls seemed to whisper the truth that had been kept hidden from her for so long. Her first move was simple. She needed to be certain. Sandra wasn't going to make another mistake. She had already been blind to the manipulations around her, and now she was going to uncover every last detail. That evening, as Kevin and Rebecca made their final preparations to leave the house, Sandra sat in her study, her mind racing. Her fingers traced the edges of old family albums and papers, as if searching for something. She didn't know what exactly she was looking for, but her instincts told her it was somewhere, buried in the clutter of years. Then she found it. A dusty folder tucked at the back of her filing cabinet. Inside, she discovered old documents, some that had never been touched in years. Will drafts, deeds, trust documents, and a few personal letters. What struck her immediately were a few papers that seemed out of place. Handwritten notes that Kevin had made about her finances. Notes about her house, her bank accounts, and the power of attorney documents she had drawn up years ago. Her heart sank further. Sandra realized that Kevin had been planning this for months, probably longer than she had suspected. These notes, these scribbles, he had been preparing to take control of everything quietly, subtly. The way he and Rebecca spoke about her, how they had dismissed her, had been part of a larger scheme to make her seem unfit to manage her own life. It wasn't just about money or the house. It was about dismantling her sense of self. But one thing in particular caught her eye, an email printout from Rebecca. It was an email Sandra hadn't seen before, a private conversation between her daughter-in-law and someone named Nancy. The name that had never seemed important before but now felt like a key. The email revealed everything. Rebecca had been planning to help Sandra with her mental decline, documenting every instance of forgetfulness, no matter how small. The notes weren't about protecting Sandra. They were about creating a case for her incompetence, to make sure they could take everything from her. Sandra's hands shook as she read the final lines. If we can get her to sign these documents, we'll have everything we need. I'm working on getting the paperwork ready. Just keep playing the role for a little longer and soon we'll have it all. That was it. The truth had finally exposed itself. Sandra wasn't going crazy. She had been right all along. It wasn't her mind that was slipping. It was their plan. They were setting her up to be declared mentally unfit, so they could take everything from her. They had already manipulated Kevin into believing her memory was failing, and now they were going to exploit it. With the documents in her hand, Sandra's resolve hardened. It was time to confront them head-on. This was no longer just about the house or the money. It was about protecting her dignity, her life, and her grandson, Noah. She couldn't let them take him from her, but Sandra knew she needed more than just these papers. She needed a strategy. She needed help. This wasn't something she could handle alone. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and she had to act fast before it was too late. She made a decision. The next day, she would visit someone who might know the truth about Rebecca's past, a woman named Nancy, someone who had warned Sandra about Rebecca's manipulative nature months ago, but whom Sandra had dismissed at the time. Sandra couldn't afford to wait anymore. If Nancy's warning was anything like the truth she had just uncovered, Sandra knew she needed to be ready for whatever Rebecca and Kevin had planned next. And she would be. The next morning, Sandra woke with a sense of purpose. The anger that had been simmering inside her for days now felt like a controlled fire, one she could use to fuel her every move. She didn't need to waste another moment. The truth had been laid out in front of her, and she was done letting them dictate her life. Sandra knew she had to confront Kevin and Rebecca directly, but before she did, she needed more information. She grabbed her coat, threw a scarf around her neck, and headed out the door. Nancy's apartment wasn't far, but Sandra's mind raced with everything she had discovered. She had known something was off for months, but now she could see the full extent of the betrayal. The carefully crafted lies, the manipulations. Sandra was furious, but more than that, she was determined. As Sandra arrived at Nancy's apartment complex, she felt a strange sense of relief. She had no idea what exactly she was walking into, but at least Nancy was someone who understood, someone who had lived through the same type of manipulation. The door opened as soon as Sandra knocked, and Nancy stood there, her face a mixture of recognition and concern. "Come in, Sandra," Nancy said, ushering her inside. "I knew you'd be here sooner or later." The two women sat across from each other in the small but cozy living room. Nancy's apartment was modest, but it exuded a quiet warmth, a stark contrast to the tension Sandra had been living with at home. Nancy had been through this before. She had been a victim of her own daughter's deceit, much like Sandra had been. That fact was both reassuring and painful. Nancy wasted no time. "I know what you've discovered, Sandra," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that Sandra recognized immediately. "Rebecca has done this before to me and to others. She's a master manipulator. You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Sandra's stomach tightened. "I can't believe my own son is part of it," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "He's always been so kind, so caring, but now it's like he's someone else." Nancy nodded slowly. "That's how it works. They play on your good intentions, your love. Rebecca knows how to charm, how to make you feel guilty, how to make you believe you're the one who's wrong. And if she can get to Kevin, she can get to anything she wants. She's done it to me, to my sister, and even to her own grandmother. It's all a game to her." Sandra felt a chill run down her spine. She had never imagined it could go this far. "But why, Nancy? Why does she do it? What does she gain?" "It's not just about the money," Nancy explained, her eyes narrowing. "It's about control. She takes everything from people, money, property, trust, and then she moves on. The worst part is, she makes you think you're the one who's crazy, the one who's losing everything." Sandra clenched her fists. "And Kevin, how could he go along with this? How could he let her tear apart our family?" "He's vulnerable," Nancy replied, her voice steady. "When you lose someone close to you, especially a parent, it leaves a hole. Rebecca knows how to fill that hole, but it's never with love. It's with manipulation. She preys on people who want to believe the best in others. Kevin might think he's doing the right thing, but Rebecca's been planting seeds in his mind for months. He's been convinced that you're the one losing control. That's what they're trying to do, paint you as the one who's unstable." Sandra sat back, trying to process everything. It all made sense now, but the truth was harder to swallow than she had imagined. It wasn't just about property or money. It was about her entire identity. They were trying to erase her, to make her invisible. The thought of Kevin, her own son, being manipulated like this made her heart ache, but she couldn't let her emotions cloud her judgment any longer. She needed to act. "I need your help, Nancy," Sandra said firmly, her eyes locking with Nancy's. "I have to protect Noah, I have to protect what's mine, and I have to stop them from doing this to me." Nancy leaned forward, her expression serious. "I'll help you, Sandra. I've been documenting everything about Rebecca. I've learned to keep track of her manipulations. You'll need everything you can get, letters, records, proof. And then we go to a lawyer. We take this to court." Sandra nodded, feeling a renewed sense of strength. It wasn't just her reputation at stake anymore. It was the future of her family, and the truth had to come out. As Sandra prepared to leave Nancy's apartment, ready to confront Kevin and Rebecca once and for all, Nancy handed her a file. "This is everything I've gathered about Rebecca. It's not much, but it's enough to start building a case. You need to act fast, Sandra. Rebecca won't stop until she's gotten everything she wants." Sandra took the file, her mind now set. "Thank you, Nancy. I won't let her win, not this time." Nancy smiled, a mix of sadness and understanding in her eyes. "Just remember, Sandra, you're not alone in this. We'll make sure she doesn't take everything from you." With the file in hand and a sense of purpose burning inside her, Sandra returned to her home, ready to face the two people who had betrayed her in the worst way possible. She wasn't the confused, forgetful woman they thought she was. She was Sandra Lee, and she wasn't going down without a fight. Sandra didn't waste any time. The moment she returned home, the weight of what she had discovered sank in deeper. The file Nancy had given her felt heavy in her hands, but it wasn't the burden of guilt it once was. It was the weight of truth. Sandra had no intention of letting her family tear her apart any longer. She had everything she needed to take action. The first step was simple: confrontation. She had already told Kevin and Rebecca they had 24 hours to leave, but that was only the beginning. The real battle would be proving the lies they had woven, the manipulations they had spun. Sandra knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was no longer afraid. That evening, as the sun set behind the skyline, Sandra sat at the kitchen table, her mind racing through the strategies she'd come up with. She knew Rebecca would try to gaslight her, to play the victim and make Sandra seem unreasonable. Kevin, too, would be on Rebecca's side. He always was. But Sandra wasn't the naive woman she had been when they first moved in. She had seen through the lies, and she was ready to fight back. Just as the clock ticked closer to midnight, Kevin and Rebecca walked into the kitchen. The tension in the room was palpable, like the calm before a storm. "Mom," Kevin began, his voice cautious but still carrying the tone of someone who believed he was in control. "We've been thinking about what you said, and we—" "No," Sandra interrupted, standing up, her posture rigid with determination. "You don't get to think anymore, Kevin. Not after what you and Rebecca have done. You've been planning behind my back for months. You've been taking what's mine, undermining me, and you thought I wouldn't notice." Kevin and Rebecca exchanged nervous glances, but Sandra wasn't giving them the chance to manipulate the situation. "I've seen the notes," Sandra continued, her voice steady but filled with a raw fury that wasn't there before. "I've seen the documents where you plan to have me declared mentally unfit. I've seen the way you've been documenting every little mistake, every minor slip-up to make me look like I'm losing control. But guess what? I'm not losing control. You are." Rebecca's face went pale as Sandra pulled out the file from Nancy. She opened it, the rustling of papers loud in the otherwise silent room. Sandra slid a few of the documents across the table toward them. "This is everything I need to show that you've been lying to everyone. I've got proof of what you've been doing, Rebecca, and I've got proof of what you've been making Kevin believe." Rebecca's lips trembled, but she quickly composed herself. She tried to appear calm, but Sandra could see the cracks forming. "You're just making things up," she said, her voice shaking with barely contained anger. "This is all lies. You've been confused, Sandra. We're just trying to help you. We love you." Sandra laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "You love me? Is that what you call this? Using me as a cash cow and trying to push me out of my own life? That's not love, Rebecca. That's manipulation. And Kevin," Sandra turned to her son, her eyes hardening. "I gave you everything. I raised you, and you let her do this to me. Do you really think I'd let you turn me into someone I'm not? I trusted you, and you've let her convince you that I'm losing my mind." Kevin looked away, guilt flickering across his face, but Rebecca wasn't backing down. "You don't understand, Sandra. You're just confused. You're not fit to make decisions anymore. You're old, and it's time you accepted it. Kevin and I are just doing what's best for the family. You've always been stubborn, and now it's time to let go." Sandra felt a deep chill as she stared at Rebecca. "You don't get to tell me when to let go. I've spent my life building this family, this home, and now you're trying to tear it apart because you think you can control it. But you've underestimated me. You've underestimated what I'm capable of." Sandra took a step closer to them, feeling a surge of power she hadn't realized she still had. She wasn't just a grandmother. She wasn't just a mother. She was a woman who had fought through loss, betrayal, and adversity her whole life, and she was done letting anyone walk all over her. "I'm not losing my mind," Sandra said, her voice low but firm. "But you too. You've already lost everything, and now I'm going to make sure you pay for it." There was a long, tense silence as Kevin and Rebecca exchanged looks, clearly realizing that Sandra wasn't backing down. Rebecca opened her mouth to speak, but Sandra raised a hand, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear another word from either of you. You're leaving my house in the next 24 hours, and Noah stays with me," Sandra said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Rebecca's face twisted with fury, but Sandra stood her ground. "And if you think I'm done, think again. You've hurt me and you've hurt my son, but you haven't broken me. I will fight for what's mine. I'll fight for Noah, and I'll make sure you pay for everything you've done." As Kevin and Rebecca stood in stunned silence, Sandra knew she had taken the first step in reclaiming everything she had lost. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain: she wasn't going down without a fight. And this time, the fight was far from over. The morning after Sandra's confrontation, the house was unusually quiet. The tension from the night before still hung in the air like smoke, thick and heavy. Kevin and Rebecca hadn't said much after Sandra's ultimatum, and Sandra didn't expect them to. She had expected them to leave, but what she hadn't anticipated was how quickly they would fold in the face of her determination. Rebecca had spent the morning packing her things, her usual bravado replaced by a quiet fury. Kevin, however, seemed to still be struggling with the weight of Sandra's words. Sandra had seen the conflict in his eyes, the guilt, the realization that he had been manipulated. She knew that somewhere deep down, he regretted how things had turned out, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Sandra took a deep breath, walking through the house one last time as if saying goodbye to everything she had fought for. But she wasn't saying goodbye. Not to the house. Not to her life. Not to her legacy. She was reclaiming it. This place was hers. It had always been hers. As Sandra made her way to the kitchen, she felt a wave of calm wash over her. It wasn't relief exactly, it was satisfaction. The fight wasn't over, but she had won the first battle, the one that had mattered most. By noon, Kevin and Rebecca had packed their bags. The house felt emptier than ever, but it wasn't loneliness Sandra felt. It was a quiet sense of strength, of reclaiming what was hers. As she watched Rebecca stuff her belongings into a cab, Sandra couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. "I'll take care of everything," Rebecca had said, her voice strained with anger and thinly veiled contempt. "You haven't heard the last of this, Sandra." Sandra didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had said everything she needed to say the night before. Now, it was just a matter of time before Rebecca and Kevin realized that Sandra was no longer someone to be manipulated. Sandra was the one in control now. Noah had been with her every step of the way, and though he was only 4, he seemed to understand that something had shifted in the air. He was quieter than usual, clinging to her side. Sandra had spent the day reassuring him, reading him stories, letting him play in the backyard. In the quiet moments, with Noah's small hand in hers, Sandra felt the weight of her victory. But the victory wasn't just in evicting Rebecca and Kevin. The real victory came in the realization that she was still the woman she had always been, the woman who had raised Kevin with love, the woman who had built this life. She wasn't a weak, forgetful old woman to be pushed aside. She was a force to be reckoned with. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Sandra reached out to a lawyer, someone who specialized in elder abuse and financial protection, and began building her case. She had the documentation from Nancy, the proof of Rebecca's manipulations, and the evidence that Kevin had been complicit. With the help of the lawyer, Sandra filed a restraining order against Rebecca and started the process of regaining control over her finances and property. It was a slow, methodical process, but Sandra knew she had to be patient. The legal system was a maze, but she was no stranger to navigating complicated situations. And this time, she wasn't alone. She had allies, Nancy, the lawyer, and even a few old friends who had rallied around her, offering support when she needed it most. Kevin, for his part, began to realize the depth of his mistake. Sandra had heard from him only once when he called to apologize. He had tried to explain that he had been manipulated by Rebecca, that he hadn't seen what was really happening. Sandra listened, but her heart was heavy. It would take more than words to heal the rift between them. "I'm sorry, Mom," Kevin had said, his voice full of regret. "I didn't know what I was doing." Sandra had sighed, the weight of everything they had been through settling over her like a storm cloud. "You'll need to do more than apologize, Kevin. You've done things that can't be undone. It's going to take time. But I hope one day we can rebuild, for Noah's sake." The reconciliation wasn't immediate, and Sandra knew it wouldn't be easy. But she was willing to take small steps, hoping that in time, they could find their way back to each other. 2 years passed. The legal battles were long and often exhausting, but Sandra's resolve never wavered. Rebecca's schemes were exposed, and she was eventually convicted of fraud, elder abuse, and financial manipulation. She was sentenced to prison, a result that Sandra had never expected but felt a deep sense of justice in receiving. For Sandra, the end of that chapter was only the beginning of something new. She had fought for her life, for her legacy, and for her grandson. And now, she was free to live her life on her own terms. One afternoon, as Sandra sat on the porch with Nancy, sipping tea and watching Noah chase soap bubbles in the garden, Sandra felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. Nancy had become more than an ally. She had become a true friend. And Noah, the joy of her life, was growing up in a world where Sandra had proven that nothing, not even betrayal, could strip away her strength. "I failed completely with Rebecca," Nancy had said one evening as they watched Noah play. "But maybe helping you raise my grandson, right, can be my second chance at getting motherhood correct this time around." Sandra smiled, the warmth of the sun and the comfort of their shared silence enveloping her. "You've already done more than enough," she said softly, squeezing Nancy's hand. "We both have, and now we get to enjoy what's left of our lives, together." Noah ran over and climbed into Sandra's lap, his small hands resting on her chest. "Nana," he said, his eyes bright with innocence. "Look, I made bubbles." Sandra laughed, pulling him closer. In that moment, with the world finally feeling like it was back in balance, Sandra knew she had fought for what truly mattered. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. No one could ever take that from her again.